Got it. It
Got
says.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Welcome everybody. Welcome to the Shopware United event, focusing on hosting. Let me start with we have 2.5 hours. I think that's more than enough. We'll see how things go, but the planning is we have three guests and myself, four of us. We're going to talk a little bit about hosting Shopware 6, performance, and all that comes with it. And afterwards, Justin has created, it's called Rooms, and in these rooms, every guest has his own room, and then if you want, you can after all the talks, you can join a guest. So, and in between, I have to do some Shopware United events promotion by decree of Justin, but it will come probably after the questions. Okay, well, let's get started. My name is Wouter den Otter. I'm a board member of Shopware United, and with that, I'm part of the community. I'm also co-founder of Support Desk and co-owner of H1 Web Development. Uh, in my personal life, I'm a proud father of two wonderful kids, and as I said, I'll be the host for today. Then we have Adrian Gilman. Maybe he can already wave a little. Yes. He's from Paderborn, Germany. He's working as a Linux administrator for Max Cluster for over 2 years now, and as former several years as an administrator and developer. So he's from all markets. In his personal life, he's interested in soccer, gaming, IT in general, Linux, and open source software. Then we have Merel Wesseling. Merel, yes, worked for almost 7 years at Hyperknown, formerly known as Byte. She's the head of marketing, and since June, Hypernode has joined forces with Hypex. Both are Dutch labels in the market, and she's bringing all new kinds of challenges regarding integrating both companies for herself. In her free time, she likes ice skating, yoga, eating out, and enjoying Amsterdam. And then last but not least, we have Maciej Kałkowski. Maciej, yes, is the CEO of Centuria, managed hosting and cloud provider. Maciej leads a team of IT experts managing medium to corporate level e-commerce sites. He's also an adjunct professor. So I want to say we have some very knowledgeable guests here at AMU University. I hope I pronounced it correctly, in Poznan. His field is theoretical computer science and distributed operating systems, which is closely connected to his business and the subject we'll be discussing today. So the idea is I'm going to ask some questions. Some of the guests will answer it, but we start off with a general question. This is for all. So the general question is Shopware hard to scale and improve performance? And how does it compare to other platforms, taking into account architecture and the stack of Shopware 6? Let me start with Maciej, if you could answer that question.
It's kind of easy. It depends. But to extend the question, the answer of on what it depends of the business processes you want to implement. So generally scaling, let's say file sharing is easy, but scaling a transactional system, it's much harder due to the bottlenecks you will meet. I mean, depending on the business processes you have, you may, and depending, of course, on the size of your business. So what's the SKU number if you have, let's say, 1 million plus SKUs? You have 10, 20, 100,000 transactions per day. The scaling becomes kind of a really hard issue to solve, but still doable. So it depends on what we're discussing. And from my perspective, the number one thing is to have a good software partner for scaling. Second is to have a good IT ops team, which we do. And third is the infrastructure part. So if I would invest, and let's say in the manner of return of investment, so ROI parameter, I would do with this order. First, invest in a good software partner, because with not going into the lectures I do, but with the software partner, you can reduce the query to the database, let's say from 20 seconds to half a second. So you can gain like even 20 times faster response time. With IT ops skills, you will, let's say you sometimes may gain 2 times due to some tweaks in the infrastructure that IT ops, IT operations guys, so I mean Linux admins, sysadmins know how to do. With hardware, you just scale linearly, and you can, let's say, optimize the hardware, gaining like 30–40%. I mean, like comparing to the single thread and IOPS parameters, you can scale with hardware by just adding it. But investing first in software is crucial from my point of view.
Okay, and you see no limitations there from for the platform, so it doesn't really matter. It's
well, you know, that from my point of view, that the platform itself is the number one thing is the software team you have. So from this perspective, the stack and software platform, the framework you're using, of course, is important, because some are easier, some are harder to manage, some are better prepared for scaling and for performance gains. Some are not that good at it, but still, I would first choose the good software development team and IT ops guys to deliver. And this is the number one. I mean, like, there's a huge gap between this and the framework and some hardware parts and everything else. I mean, the people you're working with are the number one priority, and like on the 4th position, there's like 2 and 3 is the gap. There's emptiness here. Framework is not there. Like, framework is maybe 4th, 5th, but the team you're working with, their skills, their approach, their organizational capabilities. Yeah. I mean, it's not only the technical skill set. Of course, it's important, because if you know Core Web Vitals, you know how to test, how to optimize the performance. It's crucial, of course, but also the organizational capabilities. So your team know how to communicate. Your team can closely cooperate with the business, with the infrastructure guys. So the skills of the team, and I mean the whole ecosystem, your approach. Even if I was to advise merchant what to do to build a nice ecosystem for cooperation between all the parties, because scaling, as I mentioned, it's also the business processes. So it means the integrations, how many customizations you're implementing. If, for example, with transaction processing, if you depend on the warehouse management system, also on the ERP parts, the bottleneck may be somewhere there. The Shopware, the e-commerce framework can easily scale. I mean, not easily, not always easily, depending on the level you want to get. But I would say there are no limitations to the level we know. So to the level of millions of transactions per day. If you were to do billions transactions per day, there may be really hard to work around issues, but to the level that all businesses we know in the current world, of course there are some technical details we can get into, but from my perspective, the team is the number one priority. The ecosystem of the culture of working between all the parties. openness. This is what I value, especially at my team, to say, let's say openly that we made a mistake. This is really important because it helps avoiding mistakes in the future. So this is the success factor, and the framework, of course, is important, but it's not it's not number 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah, makes sense. So in the end, yeah, people aren't scalable. So that would be the right people are not scalable, which makes it harder to scale in that level. But for the rest, you say everything is scalable.
Yeah, generally, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Adrian, any things to add to that? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, like Machi said, it depends. To start exactly like here, it depends on where are you coming from and what's your goal, where you want to go. So if you're starting in entry level and want to go to mid-level, scaling should be fine, easily done. But as higher or as bigger your shop is getting, the more you need to scale everything else, as Machi said, your systems behind. You need a good agency, programmers, developers, and but for the entry level, there are many gears to shift to increase the performance, to gain a good speed, and to scale. But yeah, the bigger it gets, the more trickier it gets.
Yeah, and compared to other platforms, how would you say Shopware holds out in scalability, performance?
I think it's compared to other platforms, it's similar. For example, you have a framework beyond Shopware, which is used also on other platforms or applications. So scalability, it's more similar, I would say.
Okay, and Miro.
Yeah, I think both guys already mentioned like all there is to say about this question, but also what we see from a support kind of perspective is that we actually see that there's way lesser questions to our support team compared to questions we get from Magento developers or merchants, because that's much harder to actually scale. So we notice that with Shopware, people can do, like merchants can do more themselves. And in our configuration, our hosting configuration is very easy also to scale. So from our point of view, it's actually, well, it's easier if you compare it to some other stacks like Magento, for instance.
Yeah,
but sooner or later somebody will say that Shopware is based on Symfony, and that's why it's rather a better approach for developing and more clear from looking for the bottlenecks perspective. So probably there's a small advantage of Shopware, and the number of developers to work on Shopware is much easier to get. There's a bigger number of potential developers of Shopware than Magento, because in Magento you need to get deeply into particular framework. With Shopware, you just it's Symfony, so you already know the basics. You already know where to look. So this may be something that we can point as the benefit from going into the Shopware directions. Of course, there are many more factors, but this is one of the probably the things that what Meryl said. It's the lesser number of tickets from Shopware. The backlog of bugs in the Magento comparing to Shopware, from what I know, is there's like a different level of number of these issues.
I know the numbers, so I've been watching the bug list for for quite a while. Yeah, it's been only growing. Let's go to Adrian. I have a nice question, and without putting people on the wall of shame, but what are the most common mistakes done by agencies slash developers, and where would you help them and assist them in fixing or identifying the mistakes?
Yeah, common mistakes, or yeah, I start a little bit earlier. So Shopware 6 is intended to work out of the box. So Shopware 6 is made to work easily, especially also for people who doesn't have knowledge. So just install Shopware 6 and it's intended to work. Just give it a MySQL database and it works. But the problem on this side is that the configuration isn't adjusted to the hardware and other services. So what I see, not a lot, but commonly, is that there are shops which are just installed and used and start using the shop, but yeah, doesn't keep an eye on improving performance. So let's say in terms of services, I often see that clients don't make use of Redis or Elasticsearch, even if an integration could be easily done. So yeah, I highly advise to use Redis as a session handler, for example, or as a cache handler, especially for bigger shops, or if you're going through high traffic scenarios like Black Friday, Christmas, or whatever festive season. Yeah,
Yeah, and
hits your shop.
do you assist your customers with like monitoring tools, or how do you? Because caching, of course, is a good solution, but before that, you will probably find some. It could be like code issues, or how do you say, memory leaks, stuff like that.
For this kind of issues, we are normally using two profilers like Tideways, or if you have trouble with your MySQL database, using the Percona Monitoring and Manager, for short PMM. Yeah, but we are also, of course, helping our customers. We have several blog articles about integrating Redis as a cache, but yeah, we also do yeah, looking at some bottlenecks with Tideways. Especially with Tideways, you can have a good overview what's happening inside your code. Especially, for example, if you're having just one small example, if you're using a plugin which is calling other domains, and if this domains gets, or if this source is getting trouble to answer your request, the whole shop is couldn't look. We have seen something like, for example, with Pinterest plugins, or Instagram plugins, when I don't know if it's something like a rate limit, but Pinterest or Instagram blocked the server from accessing it, and then every customer has to wait for the timeout to see the rest of the page. So, and that's just an example which you can clearly see with Tideways or Otter profilers, and yeah. But there are also some other common mistakes. As I said earlier, Shopware 6 is working out of the box, but this doesn't give you best performance at all. So, for example, if you install Shopware 6, the CLI worker is or admin worker is enabled by default. So yeah, there are common configurations which are standard but not good for your performance. in terms of configuration, especially about server-side services like PHP or MySQL, the easy to adjust but often forgotten configuration is the PHP send op cache value. It's just a low-hanging fruit, but it's good to adjust it to your shop needs or application needs. So you can analyze your op cache statistics like hit rate or memory usage with tools like opcache guy or cache tool, and easily adjust the op cache. For MySQL, that's also one of the which gains you a lot of performance with an easy change is adjusting your InnoDB buffer pool size. This needs to be as a best practice is the InnoDB buffer pool size should be greater or equal to your database size. Also, you can use the RIPs or the recommended InnoDB buffer pool size query to determine your needs. This is just a small MySQL query which sums up all your InnoDB tables and adds 60%, as this is also best practice. And with these few changes, you can increase your performance easily, but they are often forgotten in the first state.
Yeah, some good tips there. I'm just trying to think how we can get them across later on, because I've been taking notes and I hope everybody is, but we'll figure it out. Some very good tips there. Thank you for that, Adrian. I'm going to stay with you for another question. So we've been talking a bit about performance already and improving the hosting. What are the most common strategies on performance and hosting improvement? For example, a Black Friday situation. We've just been going through it. Hope everybody survived. But can you tell me and us a bit about how you guys tackled this?
Yeah, a lot, as I said earlier, will also takes place here. So to handle a temporary traffic peak or let's say Black Friday or Christmas sales or sales at all, if make sure your shop is running well at normal traffic times. So as the problems will exponentiate at high traffic scenario, and as earlier said, make use of tools like Tideways to monitor, or New Relic to monitor your application and get in touch with problems early. Yeah. Also make sure your server configuration matches the Shopware needs in terms of configuration. Make use of Redis, as I said earlier, or Elasticsearch for the general search performance increase. So to return to original questions, there for traffic peaks, there are a few gears which are important. For example, PHP worker limits, or everything which is limiting your connection. For example, worker limits for PHP or MySQL database connection limits. So if you can forecast your traffic, for example, from the years earlier, the years before, and you know how many, or you can forecast how many traffic you will gain within festive season, that's a good plus. So you can adjust your configuration to this. Also, keep in mind that just increasing MySQL connection limits or PHP worker limits also need more resources. So that comes to CPU and RAM especially, and yeah.
Yeah, and so you said you could analyze from the years before. You, for instance, you'd use like Google Analytics. You would see how much was the peak last year, especially like Black Friday keeps coming back, and you
Yeah,
could make a prediction on the peak you expect, right? Yeah.
exactly. So, but the one thing to say, if you're as the thing is, if like configuration limits or connection limits, just yeah, a small step. If you are experiencing, for example, if your normal traffic, the shop goes well, and at the festive season, you're expecting double or triple times of traffic, that's okay. But if you're expecting much higher traffic, like 10 times, 20 times, or whatever times, then I highly suggest to use or to make a stress test in front yeah, just to determine which yeah, configuration hits the limit and where you have to work on. So yeah, for normally these are very specific scenarios, but yeah, for the normal
Yeah.
festive season, this should be fine.
Yeah. Good answer. Thank you. I have a nice one for Merel. So many people are discuss and convince people to use the cloud. Other people say use an on-premise approach. What is your opinion? Which is better, easier to scale, and or improve performance out of the two?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question because when we were just Hypernode, we only offered cloud solutions. So back then, of course, I would have said that the cloud is better. But now we also are integrating with Hypex, which offer an on-premise solution. And we actually saw that for a lot of customers who don't have like a lot of traffic peaks, an on-prem solution is most of the time better for them because they know exactly how many resources they need. And also the resources on premise are most of the time a bit cheaper. And you also have more on premise, it's easier to do some customization to your configuration. Whereas in our cloud platform, everything is standardized. So it's easier to scale. So for instance, if you have a shop and you have a lot of different traffic spikes during the year, we always advise you to use a cloud solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really makes sense. Yeah, I can imagine. So for the really high peaks, you're saying the cloud would be performing better because you share you have a really big pool of servers you share basically. And if you go on premise, the advantage there is that you have more the customization of not just the shop, but also the environment. And you know what's coming your way because it's your server basically.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay,
Of course,
cool.
if for instance, one of the things that's also on premise is that if your disk is broken, you have to replace it, which will cause some downtime. And on cloud, you don't have this disadvantage of the on-premise solution. So for both, it really depends on the customer, on the merchant, and what he needs during the year. What we will advise, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for that reason, it's that this discussion is always going. It's never, there's not a real true answer. It depends on the business case. And you have to discuss this with your customer, your client. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and this is actually, it's the next question. We touched it already. So are there any specific business cases when cloud or on-premise is better? Maybe could you give an example for like a cloud solution?
Yeah. For instance, we had this really big customer. It's called Fairphone, and they actually launch a phone like once a year. They make refurbished phones. They launch it, and then they actually have to implement like a waiting line. because they just send out this email and like everyone wants to have that phone right now. But of course, they always go to almost the highest plan that we offer. But normally they are just on a really small grow plan. They're just happy. They don't sell a lot during the year. But when they introduce a new phone, they are really busy. Like a week before the launch, they are trying to attract customers by already putting some stuff on social, and people are looking at the website. So they step up a little bit. But then on the day of the launch, or mostly the night before, they will just go to the biggest plan. And then after 2-3 days, they can already downsize a bit. And I think that's a really good case for why you could use like the cloud hosting. And also because with cloud, it's easier to pay per day. Whereas if you have an on-premise solution, you are just on that stack, and it's harder to change.
Yeah. And if you look at that situation, would you know from your side a specific business case for on-premise?
Well, when I asked my colleagues, they would say like people who are selling the same kind of, who have almost the same visitors throughout the year, but always on-premise, you always get a little bit extra resources, whereas on cloud, for our customers, they just, they use the amount of resources they need. They won't be like extra resources that they don't use. Whereas on-premise, you would just always be a little bit, you will always have a little bit extra of resources because they're cheaper. So then if you have a little bit of spikes, then it's just okay.
Yeah.
So if you are set up for your spikes, and then normally you don't have that many spikes, you can just easily stay on that that plan or on that.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Okay, back to Mathieu again. Shopware does not have an out-of-the-box varnish solution. Is it an option for you, in your opinion, to improve performance?
You know, from my perspective, varnish is one of the best boosters I know.
You like varnish?
I like varnish.
Yeah.
Mainly because it's written in C or C++. I love the apps, that kind of apps. Well, of course, it's not just because of the C++ thing, but it's just, it was designed having as a number one priority to give us much speed up, as much boost as possible. And with varnish, you can really gain a lot. But the varnish is a little tricky because varnish caches.
Yeah, there's only one way to implement varnish, I've been told. It's the right way. If you make a mistake, you're screwed.
You're in trouble. Yeah, exactly. And so if you will cache somebody's session or you will cache somebody's credit card number, it's not the best way to use varnish, for sure. Well, Shopware is prepared to use varnish. You may even find some examples in the documentation. But generally, from my experience with e-commerce, the same was with Magento many years ago. Yep. Even though there was a plugin for varnish and for caching, just don't use it and do it on your own because it's really complicated, and there's only one right way, and you need to carefully analyze what can be cached and what shouldn't be. So for sure, varnish is my favorite option for scaling and for adding performance, and I would for sure recommend that.
Yeah, can you tell us something about maybe any numbers? So if varnish is implemented correctly, how much faster are we looking at?
Well, you know, on the page views, regular page views, the ones that can be cached, it's like go to the number or to the speed of your not your credit card, of your Ethernet card. Credit card will be later when you will pay for the infrastructure, but no, just kidding. it's really really efficient way of scaling. So you can get easily up to 1 gigabit if you just if it's just a regular traffic with just viewing, and you can cache it. Transactions are more complicated, and you go back to the subject when you analyze the app. You need to analyze where are the performance bottlenecks, so the database, Redis, and everything. But with the varnish cache, it's really easy. It's just really easy. Of course, there are limitations. For some of our clients, we have more than 10 powerful servers. I mean, with many CPUs, CPU cores doing caching, but I mean really big instances. But from general, regular, medium, small to medium e-commerce, just one varnish server would do the thing, would do the job perfectly. Due to high availability, so you need to have, let's say, you don't want single point of failure. So if you want to have a high availability site, you just use two varnishes, or you just use some other abstraction layer using some cloud offers, or just building this on top of your on-prem, or depending on the project, of course. So, but varnish is powerful, and there are not that many limitations for varnish, and for sure recommending that, like signing it right now.
Thank you for that. I'm going back to Adrian. Maciej already said it a bit. Database improvements. In your opinion, are there any database improvements and strategies to improve performance? This is a bit of a very open question. Yeah.
Okay. As said earlier from Maciej, from me, database. Speaking of improvements, mentioned earlier the low-hanging fruits: InnoDB buffer pool size, InnoDB log file size, connection limits. That's the low-hanging fruits. I should highly recommend to adjust these values to the shop needs, and further strategies are going deeper with tools like, as also said before, Tideways or Percona monitoring and management, and or other profilers, but the main goal is here to analyze your code for slow MySQL queries, for example. And speaking for Percona monitoring and management, PMM, you get a really deep insight of your MySQL, what's going on. For example, you have a top 10 of high load queries, which is a good indicator of where you can improve something. Speaking of indexes, for example, keep an eye on the handlers within PMM, especially for read random next, or look at the process states for increased value in creating sort indexes. These are good indicators that there is a problem or with an index or a missing index at all. Shopware 6 out of the box comes with a good performance, MySQL performance, but one thing which I see sometimes is that if you're installing some plugins or make custom changes to the shop, not every plugin has optimized MySQL tables, for example, and at a small scale, these plugins just working fine. For example, if you're testing these plugins within your staging environment, no other traffic is going through, so everything is working fine. Then you deploy it to your productive environment, and within a short time, everything slows down because MySQL, it's taking ages for some queries. If you don't have or you don't want to use a profiler like this, you can also, for example, use MySQL built-in tools like a slow query log, and later analyze this with, for example, Percona tools like Query Digest, or you just use plain MySQL explain to analyze the query which you are gathering through the slow query log, and then you can get a good indication where your MySQL performance slows the shop down, and
Makes sense. Yeah, and I think you've already talked about this, but also looking at into the allocated memory, of course, is important. But I think that comes after. You first look at why is it slow, why the missing indexes. But in the end, sometimes you're stuck with certain queries, or what would be then the next thing to do? Increasing memory, or
when you indicate, or when you examine the query and which is slow, the easiest thing you can do is just checking, for example, indexes. So what I said earlier is the Shopware 6 normally has good indexes, everything working fine. But if you make use of third-party plugins or custom changes, especially within the database, sometimes there are missing indexes, and then you know how slow MySQL can be when you don't have a good index, but tons of rows to examine through, and that's getting really slow, really fast.
Yeah. Okay, then I'm gonna stick with you. So we have been going through the database. Now we go to the front ends. About front end performance, we earlier talked about some common issues. What are common issues you see on the front end?
Yeah, that's more, or the things I got not so, or not common in really, but more best practices. Just for example, using uncompressed images or big files like videos, especially on your starting page or entry page, makes it slow, or using images which are wrong or not cropped at all, or not in a suitable image codec. For example, there are good plugins which converts all your images through a modern format through a modern codec like WebP. Also, one thing, especially to Shopware 6, is thumbnails. If you're, for example, if you create a folder, make sure to activate thumbnails in your Shopware media settings to be inherited to subfolders, but make sure it's activated. And if you activated them, just create thumbnails. So yeah, you have thumbnails which are faster to transfer. Some other things are make use of HTTP2 or Apache mod broadly. These are easily to do, and just gain speed with compressing the traffic. And one thing which is more tricky, but that I see a lot, is get rid of chained includes, or includes from third-party sources like JavaScript files or CSS files, especially if you're including them from third-party domains or third-party sources at all. Could be you're relying on them. So if they are slow, you're slow too. So
yeah,
and that's a more tricky way, but or more tricky to solve issue. But yeah, also one easy thing, just minify your CSS and JS, and that should be fine.
Yeah, some good tips there. Any tools you recommend for this?
Yeah, as as I recommend every time, of course, Tideways, Tideways or other
Yeah.
profilers, of course. You
Yeah,
can
yeah.
also see if you have rendering problems, or if, for example, what I saw, many plugins which integrate in the rendering. Then you have to ask a question: do I really need every plugin I installed? For example, do I really need a plugin for a go to top button, which integrates in your rendering engine, or just add it to your theme? And so with Tideways, you can get, or with other profilers too, you can get a good overview, also on the front end, of course, like rendering times.
Yeah, so just making sure you don't have any stock in Tideways. You're just technically a big fan of it as a profiler, and you can say it as much as you want. No worries there. If it works for you, you know.
I'm not sponsored by Tideways.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Adrian. I'm going back to Miro again. And it hits a bit of the front end performance, but it's a bit bigger. How do you have an approach from your end to tackle the Google Core Web Vitals, and how can you guys help?
Yes, well, actually, my newly colleagues from Hypex already worked for quite some long time on a tool called Percolate, which is actually made to automatically optimize your page speed scores. And it will minify your CSS and JavaScript files, make sure your HTML is correct. And what we do is that this tool will it's actually like a proxy. So every time a visitor is trying to access the website, the Percolate will serve the page, the optimized one. And if it sees that there were any changes made that aren't optimized yet, they will optimize that as well. And the next visitor will actually get the whole optimized page back. And that's actually a way to also, when bots visit your website, they also see this optimized page, which of course helps you with your Core Web Vital score. Also, we see that it's better for the user, of course, because actually the site is loading faster as well.
Yeah, so it's really focusing on speed, on improving the user experience for the visitor, which is where Core Web Vitals is mainly focusing on. Any other tools you have in place to monitor, or to Google delivers a lot of these tools, but any other tools you work with?
Well, we created also in our control panel, you can actually see your current Core Web Vital score. So you can actually see how it is changing. Well, hopefully not if it's going down, but if it's going up, it's nice to see. So that way, and also we of course also minimize your images to make sure they're not too big when you try to load your shop.
Yeah, and that's what Adrian already mentioned. Size does matter, especially with images. Yeah, and you have your own tool for that, or you use something open source to optimize images?
Well, I think we made our own tool back at Hypernote, but Hypex also made their own, or maybe they use an open source version, but it's also part of Percolate. So if you use Percolate, it's also already in there. And I also did some Googling, and I saw that for like WooCommerce and Magento, there are also other page speed optimization plugins, but I couldn't see one for Shopware that quick. And I'm also not sure if they are actually any good. So that's maybe a question to the other panelists as well. I'm not sure if you ever use them, or if it's very good and helpful for other customers.
And maybe Mathieu, I was going to go to you anyway. You already said optimize images. Do you use any specific tool for this? Stephen is saying.
I believe Adrian mentioned the optimizing images.
Sorry. Yeah. Adrian?
Yeah. We don't do this at our part because we encourage our customers to do this and recommend this, but we don't do this at our customer side. So
No,
we
you
just encourage them. So there isn't some special plugins, or there are plugins, Frosh, for example, which are doing great, or which is converting images and compressing them and everything, but there isn't the one plugin which we recommend. So that's on the customer side, but
yeah, the problem is making the images smaller is also the quality can be impaired. And you have to find a good balance in that.
Yeah, one thing what we can do at our side is, or what we are doing at our side is just using, for example, if you're using a Apache web server, make use of Matplotlib for compression, but this, we of course recommend resizing your images to proper fit, or recode them to a good format.
Yeah, the resizing involves putting it in the HTML. So aligning, if you want to optimize the page load, not only you need to optimize images, but exactly use the same size in your code. Because if you will use different size, then the web browser uses CPU time to rescale it, and it's a waste of time. And the page loads, you lose some small amount of page load, but of course you need to win this milliseconds, right? So it doesn't only involve scaling images, but because you have many different tools for that. For example, Cloudflare or Fastly does that, right? But at least from what I remember, I may be wrong, but there are many different tools doing that, and the important part is still the people part. So implement it properly. If you will go with the rules, then you just need to read a little about Core Web Vitals, and then you will know how to do this properly, and then you will win.
And I think this is the good thing. This is maybe the first time that Google is been so open and explicit on what it should be. They're very specific. If you adjust this, then you will gain so much, and on every single subject. So yeah, you can, and I agree, you cannot fully automate this, but if you use the right tools, you can perform. And well, 100 is maybe sometimes the ideal word, but it's to at least get it above 50. Okay, well, since we have you again, Mathieu, I have another question for you, as you might expect. How do you monitor performance? What tools do you use? What approach?
Well, you can monitor from the perspective of the tools that we have just been discussing. So, for example, Page Speed Insight. You can look, what's the performance. But the question is where you want to look at it. So, if you want to look at it from the web browser perspective, you have some like tools like Page Speed Insight. If you want to monitor what application is doing, then you can do New Relic, also other profilers. You can use Slowlog from MySQL to search for the really time-consuming queries. So depending on what you want to monitor, you use proper tool. From perspective of my company, we used Zabbix. I mean, because we still have some Zabbix monitored sites, but we switched to Prometheus, Grafana, and the, let's say, more modern tools than Zabbix. Even though Zabbix is fine, but on a large scale, Zabbix has some limitations. But the important part about monitoring, and this is crucial, I believe, the most important is to monitor the right things, because you can monitor things that don't matter, that doesn't matter. Analyze long-term metrics from my perspective. So you need to see, you need to look you need to gather the metrics you have, and to see whether on the long term they are growing, where are the potential bottlenecks in the future, especially from the perspective of the handling the biggest projects. Then you have no space for agile actions, because agile is a really perfect tool for managing software projects, but for working under stress, when like you have 5,000-10,000 transactions per hour and there's a downtime or there are some issues with performance, agile is not the best approach. So analyze in long term, and probably the most important, take actions. So just not only monitor, analyze this, but then do something about it, because this is actually the most common mistake or most common mistake, let's say, the lack of actions. The advise your clients what should they do next, how they should remove bottlenecks, because we can, when we have, let's say, medium to big size project, we analyze IOPS per drive, and this is really important, and we try to tweak to reduce the IOPS, I mean input-output operations per hard drive, because this limits the scaling of transactions. You should look whether you are close to the limits, regarding if it's a public cloud, if it's an on-prem or any different type of infrastructure, whether you are close to some limitations like the speed of your network, speed of Ethernet card, or some small part of your system which is a bottleneck, like you have queuing systems like RabbitMQ. Rabbit is really unstable when it reaches the 1 million messages in a queue. It gets unstable, and
didn't know. Very interesting.
No, well, it's probably we had that kind of issue.
Yeah.
Stressing issue, because when you have 1 million queues and messages in the queue, it means like you have some transactions probably going on, and from what I got from our support team, it's written in the documentation, but with a small errors somewhere there. No, I mean, nobody, not that many projects. Yeah, not that many projects reach that level, so it's not that obvious. So monitor the right things, not monitor everything, because you have many tools for monitoring. You can use Datadog and everything, but monitor the right things. So the software team needs to monitor the app and the browser part. We need to monitor the app and the operating system part, or the serverless, but I mean, the computing part, and analyze it, long-term analyze it short-term, and the most important, take actions. Yeah. Advise your client to do something with it, because exactly. Merchants usually don't know that it's that important. If you say you are close to some bottleneck, there may be some issue in the future. Of course, yeah, we will grow and then we will resolve it. But there are some issues that you cannot resolve quickly in an agile way. So this is my approach to monitoring. Of course, the tools that I mentioned and the guys mentioned are really important. It's really good to have something like Miro mentioned, to have it somewhere in the panel, the monitoring part. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's proactive monitoring versus reactive, right?
Yeah. Well, we have 24/17. Just if something goes above the threshold or below, sometimes they need to take action. It always needs to be a ticket for this, like always.
Right. Yeah. Which will make it an action.
Yeah, it may be like, let's say, false positive, not too many false positive, of course, because when you have too many false positive, then you lose your focus. But still, there always need to be a ticket for that, for sure.
That's a good one. Yeah. I'm going back to Merel. So what are your thoughts on auto scaling and or scheduled scaling?
Well, that's always an interesting question, because you always get perspective depending on who you're speaking to. Well, we actually spoke with a lot of our partners and also merchants that everybody, like a while back ago, everybody wanted auto scaling. But if you were to ask them, okay, how should we implement it? Nobody really had a question, because should we then, if you auto scale, when you're of course when you are near to your limitation of the hosting plan you're having, we can auto scale you to a bigger plan, but when will we downscale you? And then everybody was like, well, I don't know. You guys could see when we have less traffic peaks, but then we wouldn't know if you were to send another email inviting everybody to go back to your store, increasing the peak, shifting you to actually scale back up. So, well, since that was a very hard discussion and nobody had like the right answer, also because payment is involved and a merchant always pays, and they can, well, say to the developers, like, why did we need a bigger hosting plan? And then they were like, yeah, well, we did auto scaling. So that's hard. And also, if there's like a lot of bot traffic and you don't look into your tooling and you don't see that it's just bots, you could do something about bots. You can do a rate limiter or something like that to make sure that you don't actually need a bigger hosting plan. So that's actually why I'm more a fan of scheduled scaling, because then a merchant maybe not the merchant, but the developer can actually schedule your up or downgrade depending on when you are having your thanks, I was kind of distracted by the noise, sorry. But depending on your marketing actions, so because the developer and the merchant, they know when you can expect extra traffic and when you can just schedule it. And for instance, if you schedule it and maybe you have even more traffic, you can always go to a bigger plan. But I'm not a big fan of auto scaling because it has all these difficult implications.
Yeah, so what you do offer both, but you will give it with a fair warning, so to speak.
Well, we actually don't. We don't offer auto scaling because of the payment issues.
Yeah.
So that's why we only offer now scheduled scaling, which, well, of course, that's also a tricky one, because with the scheduled scaling through the command line, you can also make a script saying like, okay, if I see that I'm on 80% of my resources, I want to scale. But then it's something that happens with the developers, and we're not to blame as a hosting company. So we're safe.
Yeah.
That's why we don't offer auto scaling but schedules.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a bit curious also about Adrian and Mathieu, what they think about this question. Would you?
Adrian, will go first. Well, I can say that we first need to define what's auto scaling, because some companies or let's say some consultants sell auto scaling as a silver bullet, and auto scaling means adding resources when you reach some level of the usage, percentage of the usage of your CPU or something, RAM or hard drive. But it just means automatically adding resources, and that's it. It doesn't mean you will sell more with your infrastructure. It doesn't solve any real issue, and it's an easy way to charge your credit card more for adding additional resources. And let's say I could say I prefer when clients say we want auto scaling, because it usually means we need to involve more DevOps skills and sell more hours of our team, and it may mean that we will do more money out of the project. On the other hand, having scheduled scaling or like dedicated servers is faster time to market, better quality, at least on the outset, and then even keeping this on the long term, because the team doesn't believe that there's a magic auto scaling. Auto scaling is just adding resources, and it's good to implement auto scaling, but it's bad to believe that it will solve the issue of scaling.
Exactly.
So you can do this like Meryl said, that you can write your own script and add some resources and believe that it's going to work. But when you're doing scaling, it means that something that you have some higher workload on your servers. It means also that you should probably scale your database. And scaling database is not as easy as it looks, because I could give you a lecture about some database basics from the theoretical perspective, but it's not easy. It's not actually doable to keep the ACID properties and automatically scale database. You need to lose the durability of the data, and it's just like there's no single silver bullet for this. Auto scaling is just the part. At most, it's just the part of the scaling of the e-commerce. It's not the solution. It's not something that will cover everything. You need to think on your own what to do when there are some issues, because you have, like I mentioned before, you have warehouse management system, you have ERP systems. These are usually not the auto scaling systems. And you need to be prepared. You need to think about your e-commerce, not only believe that adding application servers will solve the thing. You will get to the different software limitations. I mean, probably you may not even saw coming that there's you're gonna have so high traffic, and you need to think about it before, not just believe auto scaling solves the thing. Adrian, what's your opinion? Because this is what I believe, that it's just the technical tool. It's not the business tool, auto scaling.
As Meryl and Maciej said, I also have mainly the same ideas, because auto scaling or schedule scaling, there isn't the right way. So it depends. For example, at Max Cluster, we are doing something like a mixture. For example, if your hard drive gets over a threshold of used space, we are increasing them automatically, because if you're running out of hard disk space, there could be a lot of dysfunctioning services or whatever, and running out of space is not good at all. But for other resources like CPU cores or RAM, every time, for example, we have our monitoring team, which is also monitoring everything from hardware through website or web shop performances, and if they're getting alarmed because something is getting wrong. For example, if one shop has a traffic peak because the customer sent a newsletter, and now everyone's wanting the item, and the shop is getting trouble because the load is increasing, and then we are scaling them at our perspective to keep the shop up and running. But as you said, it's a hard decision every time. So for example, speaking for RAM, if you have a smaller instance, just one server which runs your shop, and also different services like Elasticsearch, Redis, MySQL database, everything on one server, like a small instance, and that could be a problem, because you have very fluctuating rate of memory usage. For example, like your MySQL server just is using 2 gigabytes of RAM, more or less constantly. But if you have an increase in traffic, your PHP worker are increasing and also consuming memory, and maybe this leads to out of memory event where some service is getting killed. And to prevent this, or if this happens too often, or our monitoring monitors this, our team is getting alarmed, and one administrator takes a look and then scales it, because so service has to be running. So without a MySQL database, your shop is nothing.
There may be a good example. It's a theoretical example of auto-scaling, but let's imagine we have a bug in our software and we have an infinite loop. Has anyone tried to auto-scale? Has anyone tried to auto-scale the infinite loop? It may be a little. It may be a little money-consuming issue.
Of course.
So Adrian.
Sorry, no, but that's why our monitoring team is getting alarmed, and they take a look. So RAM and CPU isn't scaled automatically. These resources are just scaled if administrator says, okay, maybe this cluster needs a few gigabyte more RAM because MySQL or Redis or something else is getting out of memory. So, but of course, you can't outrun infinity loops.
That's an interesting challenge, I would say. Okay, everybody's dying to put their questions out to you. I have one more for you, Mathieu. And then looking at the time, I think it would be good to have others ask you guys questions, and a girl, Muriel, and then everybody goes to their separate room. Last one, Mathieu, and I want to say it's not a trick question. If all of the above, which means all the questions we've been going through have been applied, where do you see the final limitation for Shopware 6? And don't say infinite loops.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to start with. So if infinite loop is implemented, well, we're not going to go far.
No.
But from my perspective, having a good partners, doing business together, I mean having a communication between merchants, software team, and hosting cloud provider team, you can reach the sky, right, from my perspective. I was asked the same question with one of our biggest projects with Magento 9 years ago or 10. The company started with a few million euros, let's say, revenue when we got the project. And I don't remember the number of transactions, but it's one of the biggest e-commerces in Poland. And they recently reached the level, let's say, of 1 billion euro revenue, and over 150,000 transactions per day they reached. This is their official announcement from recent days. And you can go with the stack you have. We went from the small Magento to the really, really high level, one of the biggest e-commerces on the market. And from my perspective, you can go the same path with Shopware, because the small Magento was mostly thrown away and rewritten for this particular project. Accordingly to the velocity they had, to the level of investment in the software they required at the point. But I would say you could exactly go the same path with Shopware. You would just, once you reach some limitation, you need to find a workaround. You need to find a way how to go around it. And you can use different tools for that. You can use dedicated servers for that, for sure. You can use cloud for that. It's just not the matter of tools particularly, but I mean the whole team. First, the software team. Second, support team. And third, and it needs to be aligned, of course, but the infrastructure, the part that you just use some computing resources. And if it's going to be dedicated servers, you just need to have in mind that you need to be prepared to add these dedicated servers accordingly to the level of your needs. So, so from my perspective, having a good team will allow and will open any doors we seek and we want to open, because everybody in e-commerce wants to grow. This is the current, let's say, momentum. We have the best momentum for that right now, because everybody's investing in e-commerce. Everybody wants to grow. And with a good team, with a good software team, with nice advisories like we have today, I mean, all three companies from different markets, so not competing directly for sure. Having a good team, having good software operations team is crucial. Remembering backups, remembering different types of issues that you may meet, you can go really far. And like they say, when you want to go fast, you go alone. When you want to go far, you will go with the team. Let's say, connecting nice it to my message here. So yeah, this is what my answer would be for that question.
I think it's a nice conclusion for our questions. Let me go through the chat. I've been watching it, but it's hard to talk to you guys and type. Let's start above. Here's one from Tom. Is Tom still here? We are allowed to speak. You guys are allowed to speak now. If you want, you can ask it yourself. Otherwise, I'll do it. Tom asks, what memory limit do you use? The recommended one from the docs is pretty high. Anybody wants to answer that question? No. There's a tip from Stephen. Oh, no. Tip from Stephen, image compression. I don't know how to pronounce it. Squoosh, CLI. Yeah, I remember we used to work with Kraken. It's also an interesting image compression tool, but they're out there. And Joe, what about outsourcing the images and CSS to a CDN? Could you answer that, Maciej?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the Cloudflare, but you have Akamai, you have different providers, Fastly.
Yeah.
You may do this. It will not solve all the issues, but you need to integrate with it properly.
Yeah.
Because, for example, Cloudflare goes into your traffic more deeply than just caching. Yeah. It's rather caching is just a side effect. Of course, well, it's a planned side effect, so they want to cache, of course, but this is one of the approach you may use to just use a CDN. Sure. Squoosh CLI, I don't know this, but and with memory limit, I don't exactly remember which parameter and probably in MySQL, it was something connected to the Adrian's.
I think so, yeah.
Adrian's question, but the memory limit, well.
Yeah, memory. I don't know which memory limit do you mean. Do you think it's a PHP memory limit, or because it's memory underscore limit, or is it?
Is it it is memory underscore limit, I think.
So yeah, what memory limit do you use? Yeah, that depends on what are you doing with your shop. So, for example, the front end doesn't need too many PHP memory limits. So 512 megabytes should be okay, or maybe a gigabyte. I think this is more to the backend. So, for example, if you're uploading images which needs to be cropped, scaled, recoded, then there's a high need for a higher memory limit. But I hope that answers the question. I don't know what memory limit you mean. Sorry.
Well, the general approach to memory limits is that when you have enough memory, you should assign it. But on the other hand, assigning too big memory limit, you may miss some critical information that your application started to using too much memory. So not assigning too much, but assigning enough to process your requests. So not too much, but enough. This is the general. I know that it works for MySQL, for PHP apps, because just assign enough. You need to assign more than you usually use, but not too much, because you may miss the information that you went over some. That your app has some bugs that you should solve. So, not knowing which memory limit they mentioned, this is the general approach.
It's very generic thing, yeah. All right, so there are questions pouring in. I'm a bit stuck here. Justin, are you still there?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. So looking at the time, can we assign people to their rooms?
Yeah, what I can do is I just open the breakout rooms and then you can go in there. Otherwise, I can assign people randomly if you like. I'm going to stop the recording now, okay?
Yeah.
Recording is stopping.
Thank
so
you.
you can, anyone who didn't want to talk when the